We have Mark Gress, VP of Recruiting at Prodigy Sports, and we're going to talk about listening. So as a VP recruiting at Prodigy, you have to do a lot of listening, right? And then you also tell your candidates who you're trying to place who are doing interviews that listening is a big component of doing the interview, but then also gathering information to prepare for the interview. So why don't you give us some knowledge on listening?
Sure, thanks for having me. And with listening, it's one of the things that our founder talks a lot about with our new staff members, with our current staff members, whether they're 22, 23 years old or people that have been around for 10, 15 years in the industry, is one of the biggest skills that we can have as recruiters, as HR people, but also beyond that as practitioners, is listening. And as recruiters, that's every single day. Every phone call we make, every interview we conduct, listening is probably more important than the questions we ask, to be quite honest with you. And that translates to sales too, by the way. Salespeople that are selling a ticket or selling whatever, they need to be taking information in. It's kind of about the information gathering. When I do an interview, honestly, and I'm trying to see what a candidate's skill sets are, their examples, if I can ask like 3 questions and that's a 45-minute interview, that's one of my favorite interviews. I want to be able to go on to a phone interview, Skype interview in person, and let that person do the talking. Take a ton of notes. You're going to see me writing like I'm a stenographer, like a court reporter. But I think the important thing is the active listening too, right? And I translate that to that's a personal life. I'm married, so I think with my wife, right, and making sure that I'm taking that information in, and it's not just passively. It's not just as I'm on my phone or I'm on my computer, I'm watching a TV show. It's taking it in, it's digesting. It is formulating follow-up questions. It is engaging in a dialogue and a conversation. But I'm seeing that professionally and personally. And when we go through the candidate search process, we find people, we do the interview, and we're doing a lot of listening. One of the key pieces we give them as advice, to your point, we submit them to the candidate, to the client, and we say, hey, you're interviewing for a C-level job, big-time position. Make sure that you're taking a lot of information. When you're firing questions at that company, right? You're interviewing for a chief marketing officer, VP of sales. Ask questions and just sit there and just take it all in, digest, understand. Years ago, I had a candidate that was going for a job with the Sacramento Kings, and senior level job Sacramento Kings, goes through a full day of kind of a car wash of interviews, and he gets to the point of the last person of the day, the president of the team. That person had kind of done their due diligence, and they asked a few questions. At that point, it was, all right, ball's in your court. What do you have for me? What questions do you have? Because I'll talk for the next 15, 20 minutes, and you're the candidate. You're going to move your family. You're going to change jobs. You're going to uproot your kids. You're going to change titles, money, everything. The candidate said, nope, I don't have any questions. I don't have anything to ask you. I'm not looking to gain information. I'm not looking to learn and understand. Right. That person didn't want to listen. That person didn't want to hear anything. And I use those 2 words right there interchangeably. And I thought about this just a minute ago. There was a movie, so White Man Can't Jump is a great movie. Right. And in White Man Can't Jump, there's a scene where the 2 main characters are talking about there's a difference between listening and hearing Jimi Hendrix. And I think there's the same thing. You could, whether you're interviewing a candidate, whether you're talking to somebody because you're selling them a season ticket or a sponsorship, you can certainly hear it. It can kind of go in one ear and out the other, but are you truly kind of digesting it? Are you engaging kind of that conversation? Are you understanding what they're saying? And that there is a difference between those 2 things.
Sure. So active listening, I think it's a great term, and I was actually going to bring it up if you did it, but I'm glad you did, which is, are you listening to respond and ask, or are you listening to actually understand and comprehend? So to that point, and you made mentioned that story about questions. Yeah. Is there anything that students or interns should be kind of listening for? Yeah. Are there things that maybe they should do preparation-wise of going in and say, hey, if I hear these things, I'm going to align that and then ask a question that's related to that? Yeah. Because people might be really good listeners and they might be a sponge to absorb that, but they might not ask the right questions based on what they heard.
Yeah, I think it goes into not being afraid to ask for 2 things, right? Clarity, or just kind of asking a follow-up question in general. That, again, there is that quote that's out there about there's no such thing as a dumb question, but I think whether you're interviewing for a job, whether you're just starting your first few days, I think if I could reflect back on my career, one of the early jobs I had as an intern at the Eagles back in the day, I don't think I asked enough questions. I think I was kind of taking it all in. I took great notes. I came in every meeting prepared with a pen and a piece of paper, but I don't think I was asking that follow-up. Maybe it was fear. It was probably nervousness, apprehension about that. But I think asking for clarity, clarification, nobody's going to be offended by that, by the way. But I think having follow-ups just kind of ready to go, but not thinking about asking those questions. I would almost say, so if I'm going on a job interview, I might write 5 or 7 questions down or whatever that is, but I'm not thinking about those questions until it's time for me to think about those questions.
Very
because
good point.
You're right. I mean, I think about that on a job interview a lot. Our younger staff of recruiters, who's fresh out of school, they might have great soft skills. They might have been in sales or HR, but when they're on the interview, I think sometimes they're thinking about the next question they want to ask. Right? They ask about the greatest strength. They all of a sudden know that their next question is going to be about the greatest weakness, or tell me about a time, or give an example. They're not focused on that greatest strength one. Like, if I'm asking that greatest strength and I don't feel like I understand that person, well, tell me more about it. Give me an example of where you utilize that greatest strength. I need to ask 2 or 3 follow-ups, and it's going to go completely off script. That's okay to go off script.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And, I'm hearing this stuff, and someone who works with students, I always pride myself in teaching them to get informational interviews. So that leads me to kind of another question, which is, how can you practice listening? I mean, what are like 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, 5, 6 steps that you can give in terms of practicing listening?
It's not easy.
No, it's definitely not.
And it comes with time. I think a lot of times it does come with time. And I would say seeing how other interviews, I mean, honestly, learn by osmosis is what a coach used to tell me. I think seeing how other really good interviewers do and interviewers in any case, job interviewers or interviewers like see how Bob Costas, Mike Tirico, see how other people are doing it and why they're what's the line of questioning. So I think a lot of it's learning by osmosis. You might not learn it in a classroom unless you're kind of getting that one-on-one practice, and where you're sitting across the, I think mock interviews or informational interviews is a way where, whether you're interviewing for a job or you're just informational interviews, you're interviewing for information. That's what you're doing. I would say it needs to be genuine too, though, because informational interviews you can go down the trap and the rabbit hole of it being, you still wanting an eye on the prize of something afterwards. I want an internship. I want an introduction. Informational interviews, it should be a genuine connection. I mean, no different.
Should be informative.
It should be informative. It should be the whole idea behind networking, right? Building a relationship. If you're trying to build a relationship with somebody, it's got to be genuinely interested in what they have to say. I don't have quick and easy tips because I don't think there's no kind of blueprint or Cliff's Notes to it of we'll always ask this follow-up question. I think people do like talking about themselves. If you go to a networking event and you're trying to get business cards and do that whole song and dance, asking people questions about what they do, what challenges they face, how the summer's going. You almost kind of throw up some softballs. I mean, don't treat it like a job interview. Throw as many softballs up there as possible and just let that person talk and let that person ramble and take notes or take mental notes and make sure you're following up about what you learned or what you thought you learned that day.
Great. So I think that's a good spot to end, because even though this weren't tips and advice, it was. And it was helpful to them to understand, you kind of have to just put yourself out there. You have to kind of listen, and that is the practice that you need. So, continue to talk to people, continue to ask questions, and then be a sponge, absorb it, comprehend it, and see what you can do with it, because every person listens differently. Every person has different goals. Every person has a different style. So why don't you guys start there, and thank you, Mark.
Of course, you're welcome. Thank you.